Thank you for turning to page 121. Welcome back to page 121. Today I want to talk about a book that's near and dear to my heart. The 1980 volume of Deities and Demigods, presented by TSR. This book has a bit of a history of controversy to it in a couple of different manners. But in 1980, when I was new to the game, this book was new to us. So I started the game just a few months before this book came out. This book was quickly added to my library and became a real game changer. And I'm going to go through the book a little bit and explain why in 1980 this was just a big monster manual. So here we go for the first look. One of the main reasons this book was so near and dear to DMs and players alike is it expanded the characters' abilities. It brought them all the way up to 25. Prior to this, we only had information up to 18. With this expansion, we were able to take a look at, most importantly, the issues based with strength. Girdle of Hill Giant Strength appears in 1979's Dungeon Master Guide as a magic item to be given out, along with Gauntlets of Ogre Power and Magic of the Titans, things like that. Well, this expansion of the explanation of the stats also gave us a better look at the strength. So we were able to better adjudicate strength as to bend bars, lift gates, that kind of thing. Also, intelligence was greatly expanded. Dexterity, wisdom. This book was just a gold mine for ways to expand your character beyond the 18th digit. Now, that's not to say that every player character that I ran in the early 80s had godlike stats. Far from it. But there were some games where that was the end result of a long campaign, and it was nice to have this book as a reference to be able to go ahead and show what those enhanced stats did. The next thing about this book that I found very useful was explaining standard divine abilities and the relationship between the clerics and their deities. It doesn't go into a ton of detail. The later book, Legends and Lore for 2nd edition, did a lot more detail on that, but at least gave us a couple of thumbnails that we could run our games by and be consistent between campaigns. In the early 80s, I ran 2 or 3 different campaigns with different groups. And for me, at least, it was important that I be consistent between the groups. Some of the controversies surrounding this book, it has to do with some of the entries in it, and I'm going to go to that in just a second. Cthulhu. H.P. Lovecraft, we hardly knew ye. These are the infamous entries for the Cthulhu mythos. These were not approved by H.P. Lovecraft's estate. It became a little bit of an issue for the book once it was published, and copies with the Cthulhu and Melnibonéan, however you say that word, mythos are pretty sought after these days. This was some useful stuff. I didn't really use anything out of Cthulhu. I used much more out of the Greek and Norse out of this book. And I'm trying to go to the Melnibonéan. So, okay, here we go. Now, Melnibonéan mythos. This is the Elric books. Also not approved by the folks that own the copyright to Michael Moorcock's work. Melnibonéan, more than anything else, I think, as any one source, had a ton of influence on D&D. The alignments, including especially the emphasis early D&D had on true neutrality. I think a lot of that came from the Elric saga and the stories. I have to admit, Stormbringer did make an appearance in my campaign, not by my hand, but another DM that introduced it. I DM'd a player character who walked around with it for a long time. We watered it down a little bit so the player character could actually be played, but its soul-eating powers and such were there, and he had to deal with that. It was a fun character. He went out of my campaign in about 83 when he joined the armed services, but it was a fun character. I kind of miss Stormbringer in our campaign a little bit. The other thing, those are the controversy of the book, because there was no express permission to use either mythos, they ended up getting pulled from later printings. Both the Cthulhu and Melnibonian got pulled from later editions. Now, Nawan, which is the Fafford and Gray Mouser, did get approved, and they were legal to be published in here. And it was kind of funny because the Nawan Rat God, as seen there, for whatever reason, I kind of latched onto him as a DM, and he became my bag of hit points if I needed somebody slapped around a little bit or I wanted to give them a big challenge. I didn't treat him as a lesser god so much as just a big rat. He was a lot of fun. The Nawan Rat God appeared a lot in my early campaign. He was just fun to have around as just a bunch of hit points with a decent armor class and an opportunity to humble a few of the stronger characters or be a major victory for the players. We also tended to use some of the more monstrous monsters like the Snow Serpent and out of here. So the Nawan mythos in our campaign saw a lot of use. The next section of this book that saw a lot of use was the non-human deities. This is the first real look we had at deities that didn't belong to any of the Thor and Hercules from the Norse or Greek respectively. So the idea that the monsters had gods was very interesting and added a lot of depth to the monsters beyond the hey, there's orcs, let's go fight them. We actually got to see some of the motivation for what the orcs were doing. We have the various elf gods, including Lolth, who makes her appearance here. The goblins, the gnomes, the halflings, and of course, the orcs with Grumsh. Grumsh himself never really appeared in my campaign, but his followers were prominent in a lot of my games. To this day, I still have a soft spot in my heart for old Grumsh, One-Eye, foe of the elves. He was a very good MacGuffin in a lot of my early campaigns. And now we come to the Norse mythos. Because of the influence of comic books in my campaign, for obvious reasons, with Thor the Mighty, the Norse mythos saw a lot of use in our games. Mostly, these were just worshipped. There was an excellent article in The Dragon years later, after this came out in about 85, I want to say the article was, about adventuring in Asgard. And I have to admit, yes, I did stick a high-level group in Asgard for a little bit to hang and drink with the gods. It was a lot of fun. So this is the original volume that was published with the other ones, obviously. I acquired a backup copy from, yes, Half Price Books some years ago. This one does not have the Cthulhu or Melnibonian mythos in it, simply because it was $10, but it's in a really nice condition. I wanted it as a reference for the stats and for some of the other deities. And then, for second edition, wrong book, for second edition, Legends and Lore came out. The name Deities and Demigods was becoming viewed as being a little controversial. Some of the, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about it, but some of the satanic panic was happening, that kind of stuff. The corruption that D&D was allegedly causing, that kind of thing. So the book's name was changed to Legends and Lore. This was actually an upgrade overall because you get a lot more detail on how the various creatures interact. You get a bunch of new spells, how the gods interact with their followers. And this makes it clear that the creatures listed in here are not the gods themselves, of course, but they are avatars. So the avatar, yeah, you might be able to slap the avatar around a lot, Mr. Super Strong Guy with 2 purple swords. But remember, that's just a figurehead for him. The real power is still sitting up there getting mad. So this changed things a little bit because the gods became less reachable, much more powerful. So I have mixed feelings about this book, although I do use it quite a bit as a reference for how player characters would interact with certain gods. It's been very useful to have in my collection. Again, it was a Half Price Books acquisition, and I do like it a great deal. So again, that's a very quick look at Deities, Demigods, a 1980 book updated in the late 80s. That's still one of my favorites, and as I said, in a lot of ways, for the earliest days of my campaign, this was treated as nothing but a big monster manual. So I think there's a lot of older DMs out there who would say much the same thing if they were taking a moment to be honest with themselves. And I say it with pride. It was how D&D was played at the time, and I wouldn't change a thing. So that's it from page 121 for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Well, that closes the book on another episode of page 121. Please leave your comments below, and if you enjoyed what you saw, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.